Morning.
Morning.
So, what is the genesis of this, and how does it explore the world in space? How much is going to be here? How much is going to be there?
Well, overall, the show is kind of a split focus. It's definitely about the people on the ground and the people in space. So it's some of the characters work at NASA at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, and it's about them and their families. And then there's also astronauts and their families. So it's kind of like it's trying to paint a portrait of NASA as a whole, really. The show started, the genesis of it, a couple years ago. I got a call from Zach Van Amberg, who's one of the executives who runs Apple TV Plus. And he had been at Sony for a very long time, where Maril and I had been working for a long time. So we knew each other. He invited me over to have a chat after he had just started working at Apple, and said, "Oh, there was this idea that we had kicked around a few years ago about doing a show about NASA in the 70s. What do you think about that?" "I still think about that idea," he said. And I went, "Oh, that would be cool. We could revisit that, do sort of a Mad Men, at NASA kind of a show." And I went home and thought about it, and the more I thought about it, I realized that if you could do that show, you could do the Mad Men at NASA, but the story of NASA in the 70s, in my opinion, is kind of a sad one, where the budgets keep getting cut back, the program keeps getting smaller, we're not going to go to Mars, things keep not happening. And when I was growing up, I was excited by what the program was supposed to be, all the amazing things that were going to happen in space that didn't come to pass. So I went back to Zach and said, what if we did the alternate version? What if we did the version of the space program that I thought we were going to get, but we didn't? And he got excited by that, and then I was talking separately with Matt Wolpert and Ben Nedivi as a team of writers looking for some project to develop with them. And this, I mentioned it to them, they got very excited about it, and then we all just kind of said, well, let's collaborate on this and we'll create the show together. And that's kind of how it all.
No, there is this kind of a new wave of like space fiction, but the movies, the more novels that's set on the moon, or like this close near future science fiction that we're looking again at the stars and thinking about ourselves there, not like space opera, but like moon, Mars, so this hard science fiction. Do you think that's only because it was 50 years ago, so it's a nice date, or does the billionaire space race maybe influence that?
In my personal opinion, I think it's the billionaire space race has had a lot to do with it. I think, people have gotten excited about the possibilities of going to space, and I think those different projects like SpaceX have sort of captured the public's fascination and kind of go, oh yeah, we used to do these really cool things, let's do more of them. And NASA's kind of been stuck in a bureaucratic morass of, different presidents come in with different priorities, and the program has never quite gotten back on its feet. And then you've got these other people that are actively doing things in space, and the videos of them look cool, like when SpaceX landed, took the rocket off and landed back down like that, and then did two of them at once. It's sexy and it's fun, and I think it captures the public's imagination about space travel. So it's just, and that combined with the 50th anniversary, it's all kind of like, oh yeah, it's back in the zeitgeist again.
When envisioning an alternate history, did you have to consult with any historians, or did you take more of that labor on yourself to kind of try to make sure you're taking everything that you need to into account?
I did. I started with a base of knowledge. Like, I was always a fan of the space program, read a lot of the books, and I just was always really interested in it. But then, yes, we consulted with a lot of outside people. Garrett Reisman is one of our technical consultants, who was a former astronaut at NASA. And we also have Mike and Denise Okuda, who come from Star Trek, but had also worked with NASA in various capacities. And then beyond that, all the different departments on the show had their own technical consultants and researchers. We had a full-time historical researcher in the writer's room. So there was a commitment to really getting as much authenticity in the show as possible.
Do you have any big themes you want to address in this first season as far as storytelling goes?
There's so many themes. It's, we talk about the idea of what it means to go beyond where you are, relationships, interrelationships between the husband and wife, and what happens when, the woman all of a sudden goes out in the workplace as well, and what that means to a relationship. Obviously, optimism, we always talk about by losing the race to the moon, we ultimately will win, and that's a theme that we look at quite a bit in this first season, and then hopefully seasons beyond. don't know if there's anything else.
It's an aspirational show. It's a very optimistic show. It's really about here's the path that could have been that we could still do. It's like really sort of saying this was an amazing time and we could have gone this word. We could have like really expanded the footprint in space. We could have committed a lot of resources to something positive and uplifting to people in the United States and around the world. And by implication, you're saying, and we still can. So that's like the general big theme of the series.
How did it feel going back into space? You all have been there a lot, and you've been away for a little bit.
It's fun to be in space, especially since I don't have to like be in the rigs and on the wires to do it. But it's fun. There's nothing quite like going on a soundstage and getting into a spacecraft. It's just, it's a childhood kind of fantasy where you can really just put yourself there. We had a moon base, in season 1, and it was completely contained. So when you walked in and there was actually a backing out the window that looked like the moon, you were there. You were like on the moon, and it was really kind of special and cool and really fun. It was just as cool as being on the Battlestar Galactica or the Starship Enterprise at times. You could just kind of like imagine that you were really in space, which was really fun.
Well, also, I think, certainly Battlestar Galactica was obviously fictional. And I think certainly for someone like Ron who loves space and also loves history, it's such a perfect blend of the two. And also I know Ron talks about, his memories of where he was when they landed on the moon in '69, and I think that must be fun for you to kind of revisit that in real time.
By revisiting, because you may remember it vividly or more, but you also have to have research about the 1969, and you see what's happening now. Can you do a comparison in terms of right then everyone was rooting for NASA, it was a big race, and now, as we established, there is also this excitement for space in general. Do you see any comparisons in terms of enthusiasm for that?
A little bit, because there's just something about the effort to leave the planet that excites people. It's sort of built into our DNA. For literally thousands of years, we've looked up in the sky and looked at the stars and the moon and thought about what would it be like to go there. And then when you see men and women actually doing it, everybody kind of leans forward because it's such a compelling leap of the imagination, something you can see with your eyes literally every day, every night, that you can't touch, and then someone is going to actually do it, and it's just like it's a thrilling kind of moment, and I think it thrilled people in '69, and it thrills people today.
Can you talk, because I know that with the reimagination of some of the stories, plot points, we were going to be seeing like the first woman on the moon. That's going to be the little shift a little bit. So can you talk a little bit about that and how you guys decided to go with that?
Well, once we said let's make an alternate history, and you're going to pivot, like things are going to change. The Russians are going to beat us to the moon. What are the things that would cascade out of that? And one of those became, well, what would be the cultural changes that would happen as well? And we came up with a story about, how American women would get into the program and to the moon much earlier than they did historically, which had a lot to do with the Soviets. People forget that the Soviets put the first woman in the moon, put the first woman into space a good 20 years before the Americans did, which is insane. Yeah. So when we were going and retooling history, we said, well, let's pivot on that. Let's change a lot of things, and political things change, things, the course of nations change, cultural things are going to change. So it was really an interesting, fun exercise to see all the things that could change from just turning one thing around.